you cast your minds back to when the Slipspace Engine Demo first revealed the development of Halo Infinite and showed a glorious vista on Zeta Halo with wildlife and sentinels, diverse biospheres with deep forests, mountainous ranges, coastal regions and expansive greenlands. And now you fast forward to Halo Infinite, and what do you find? Where are the animals? Where are these diverse biomes? Where are the deep forests? Where are the coastal regions? Where are the swarms of sentinels going about their business? Where's the life? Why is the Halo Infinite we got so different from the Halo Infinite we were shown so many years ago? Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and today we're literally just taking a good long hard look at the state of Halo Infinite at the moment and weighing up against our expectations from the earlier trailers and teasers that we were given way back in the early stages of Halo Infinite's development. I mean, it's no secret, we are not seeing the things that we were shown in the Slipspace Engine Demo so many years ago. Halos are known for how diverse they are and how varied they are. In Halo CE we visited huge canyons, rolling green vistas, cold icy tundras, swamps, mountainous regions, coastal islands. The Slipspace Engine Demo showed us exactly that. It showed us deep, dark forests. It showed us rolling vistas. It showed us desert environments, coastal regions. Why is all of this lacking in a game that's now being delivered 20 years later with amazingly superior hardware and software backing it up? We were shown wildlife roaming around the Halo. That was something that was initially intended to be put into Halo CE. In fact, some of the early trailers and campaign demos from Halo CE, when it was still technically a third-person game, showed large wildlife, the blind wolves and other creatures roaming around the Halo. And yet 20 years later, we're delivered a game that completely lacks that, save for what are effectively gophers and a few bird varieties. I mean, occasionally in the background you can hear the howls and sounds of other wildlife, but where is it all? Why is it so absent? Well, technically speaking, there are two explanations. One is the lore reason that perhaps explains why this is what we're seeing, and the other is, well, the reality. So let's look at the lore reason first. The entirety of the Halo Infinite campaign takes place on a very small section of Zeta Halo, a broken and damaged section of Zeta Halo. It's where most of the major activity of the Banished is taking place. It's where Escharum can be located, and it's where most of Master Chief's fight takes place. We had to gain a foothold on Zeta Halo because we had no foothold. Small pockets of human forces had been imprisoned and were distributed across this area of the ring and likely across the rest of the ring. But because this area of Zeta Halo is where Cortana ultimately made her sacrifice, where the ring was actually physically destroyed, and where most of the Banished effort are currently being focused, especially with the introduction of the Endless, there was very little reason for Master Chief to venture much further around the ring. Since Halo Infinite is considered a soft reboot and is thus drawn a lot of parallels towards Halo CE, we can use the story of Halo CE as something of a comparison to Halo Infinite. Now with Halo CE, we went to a great many places on the ring. We first arrived and we were just trying to get human forces collected together again. Then we realised that Captain Keyes had been captured and we had to go and find him. Shortly thereafter, the realization that this is a completely different world and we've never encountered it before meant that we had to understand where we were, places of important interest, so we went to the map room. Once we knew these places of interest, the control room was chief among them. So we made a beeline for going to the control room, upon realizing, of course, that Captain Keyes and some other Marines were in mortal danger with the risk of the flood being released. Once we got there, 343 Guilty Spark acquired us to recover the activation index. That meant going to the library, and then of course after actually achieving that particular objective, we then had to go from the library back to the control room. We realised we were betrayed, and then we realised that the only real other option that we had left was to stall the firing of the Halo and then activate the Pillar of Autumn's fusion reactor to blow the ring up. We went to a lot of different places because the objectives necessitated it. In Halo Infinite, that's not the case. Practically everything that is the most urgent of objectives is happening in a very small geographical area on the ring. Now, this is both a narrative decision and a technical decision, because as a narrative decision, it means that the story can take place in what is actually a very large geographical area and allows exploration and freedom of movement, unlike anything we've had in a previous Halo game. But it's also a technical decision because although the Slipspace engine is extremely powerful, it can't render an entire Halo ring, which last time I checked had an internal surface area of 15 million square kilometers. And it just so happens that this particular area that we're isolated to doesn't vary a lot in its biosphere. And that's not to say that in future campaigns we won't go to other environments and other areas of Zeta Halo and find the glorious vistas and the deserts and the coastal regions and the icy tundras that we're so accustomed to seeing on Halos and that we were shown in the Slipspace Engine Demo. It just, at the moment, the objectives are focused around this very small geographical area, and thus there was no immediate need for Chief to go much further than this area. So that explains one aspect of it, but where's all the wildlife? Well, take into consideration that the wildlife we're talking about here, I'm assuming, is probably the larger wildlife, the likes of the deer that we saw in the forest area, the rhino-type creatures we saw in the grasslands, things like this. Well, you've got to bear in mind, this section of Zeta Halo has been torn apart. Now, seismic activity, especially of this scale, would cause a lot of the wild animals to flee the area and get as far away from what's going on as possible. The likelihood is, with how much it broke up, large swathes of this wildlife were actually ejected into space or killed outright. There's also a distinct possibility that since it's been 6 months, the brutes have hunted a lot of these animals to feed themselves. So these larger animals would be few and far between, and because of the seismic activity of the ring shaking itself apart, would have fled the area to get as clear from the seismic activity and the destruction as possible. And this of course left behind the birds, which could become airborne when this particular event took place, insects, which aren't massively displaced or bothered by events like this anyway, and small creatures like the gophers we see that actually maintain most of their time underground, and are small enough and thus not dependent on large home ranges to maintain their lives on very small geographical areas. That explains somewhat where the wildlife is. There's a distinct possibility again in the future that when we go to other areas of the ring we will encounter this wildlife, the wildlife that fled this area, and will likely come across much more, given that most of the wildlife that we've seen tend to be animals that favour grasslands and forest areas. We're not accounting for tundras and deserts and coastal regions, so there's still probably a lot more to be seen. So that does somewhat justify why we're not seeing quite what we saw in the Slipspace Engine Demo based on the lore and narrative that's happening at the time. The primary objectives of the Halo Infinite campaign are all relatively close together and focused on this broken area of the ring, and as such Chief didn't venture far enough to find different biospheres like deserts, coastal regions, mountainous regions, larger grasslands, deep forests, swamps and the like. And the breaking up of this section of the Halo ring resulted in much of the larger wildlife either fleeing to get clear of the area, being consumed in the 6 months that elapsed between us first seeing Zeta Halo and Zeta Halo inevitably being broken up as a consequence of Cortana making her final sacrifice, and also just fleeing from the area due to the seismic activity. I think, within reason, that's a pretty good explanation as to why we're not seeing what we saw in the Slipspace Engine Demo. And you've also got to bear in mind that the Slipspace Engine Demo is to demonstrate what the engine can do. The true extent of just what it's capable of in ideal situations. All of the things it can render, all the particle effects, how many individual assets it can track at one time, the scale, the lighting effects, the ambient occlusion, all of this stuff is demonstrated in an engine demo. This bodes well for the future campaigns of Halo Infinite. This bodes well for the variety and the wildlife. It shows what the engine can do and what it inevitably will do when we go to other areas of the ring. It just so happens that at the moment, most of the objectives and most of the story happened in a very small geographical area. And I feel like that's a relatively accurate lore description or lore reason as to why we don't see what we saw in the Slipspace Engine Demo. But what is the reality? Well, the reality is the game was developed under extraordinary pressure. The biggest reason obviously being that we had a pandemic, the scale of which we hadn't seen in nearly a century. This put pressure on the development process of the game. Many of the employees worked from home, and anyone who's worked in this kind of collaborative and creative industry will know that the value of actually being able to walk over to the desk of one of your co-workers who are developing something awesome, be inspired by it, and then go and create something off of that inspiration yourself is absolutely invaluable to the creative process. This was something that was decidedly lacking due to the restrictions of the pandemic and employees working from home, but they still managed to work around it and occasionally go into office before, during and after the pandemic in order to deliver what they inevitably did. But you've also got to bear in mind that with any game, and particularly with Halo, we know with practically every game there has been cut content. In some games, entire levels have gone missing simply because they've been left on the cutting room floor. They just didn't have time to get it up to the standard that they wanted for the final finished product. Halo Infinite is no exception to that ethos. It's inevitable. When you create anything, some of it ends up getting cut. Some of it ends up not getting developed in time. There's some things that you would have liked to be in the product that you inevitably can't due to the constraints. This is a basic reality of design methodology. But just because there's content that's been cut from the current Halo Infinite campaign doesn't mean that it's not going to be coming back in one way or another. It's been said over and over again that Halo Infinite is the platform for the next 10 years worth of development for the Halo franchise, so we're likely to see expansions, we're likely to see new campaigns, we're likely to see things that were cut being reintroduced into the new campaigns. Anybody who has the art of Halo Infinite book will see just how much was scripted out. And bearing in mind this is cherry-picked artwork and concept art from the development process, a tiny cross-section of some of the concept art that was developed for this game. And yet, there are likely hundreds of images and concepts that just weren't used, or that weren't developed out enough, or changed unrecognisably from their original concept. The reality is, Halo Infinite was developed over a course of approximately 6 years, probably a little bit more than that. However, much of that time was used to develop the actual engine behind the game. And while, yes, simultaneously there was the development of the storyline and everything else going on with the actual narrative of the campaign, really the engine was the major focus for a large portion of that time. And again, you have to factor in the limitations that they had in regards to the pandemic, the limitations in regards to what they had with our feedback, our response to some of the things they released, having to then scramble and change or adjust things as a kind of a damage control, so to speak. What I'm getting at here is that every single game experiences problems and cuts, setbacks and restrictions in time or budget or manpower or all of the above during its development. Every single game experiences that, and not just games, movies, products, services, absolutely everything which is created experiences some degree of cuts redundancy, or some form of restriction. It's an inevitable part of the development process. The campaign that we got was as a consequence of all of these external factors acting upon the finished product. It's as simple as that. Yes, we saw the Slipspace Engine demo, but again, it was a demo. It was to showcase what the Slipspace Engine was capable of, not necessarily what the narrative was to represent. Developing a game, developing anything in truth, is a very long, arduous and stressful process to go through. Implementing a design methodology, prioritizing the needs, wants and desires of the product, prioritizing what gets developed and what doesn't, deciding whether or not to continue to develop something or cut it, the distribution of manpower, the distribution of funding, working within limitations of hardware or software, working within time constraints, developing something for a dedicated and passionate fan base that you want this product to be adopted by and taken under the wing by your fan base rather than shunned or rejected because it doesn't meet expectation, while simultaneously juggling the business aspect of developing a game. For us, it's all game, it's all play, where we play the game. But to a games company, this is their business, and business needs to be done. Just developing a game isn't enough. You have to secure the profit margins. You have to make sure that the product you create is profitable so that you can guarantee that you're still around to make subsequent games. So yes, what we saw in the Slipspace engine, what we saw in some of the earlier trailers, we didn't get with the launch of Halo Infinite. But what we did get is still absolutely remarkable given those constraints. And it's important to bear in mind that there are more campaigns to come on the Slipspace engine. There are more stories to be told, more places on Zeta Halo to visit. So we will inevitably see some glorious wonders in the years to come. Thanks for watching, commenting, liking and subscribing. I just want to give a quick shout out to my patrons and YouTube members: Spartan10148, my Metarch, Dylan, Falcon X003, Kenwood, Irrefutable Justice, Leon, Neek and Ramiz, my monitors, Alvin, Andrew, Brand, Brian, Cameron, Chris, Darian, Devon, Flaming Halo, Greenblood, Kyle, Legions Lost, Michael, Prophet Bear, Spartan and Wolf, my sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, my diligent enforcers, and all the other awesome people that have jumped aboard to support the channel over at Patreon. Another shout out to Todd Morrison, my Transcendent YouTube member. And just one quick reminder to support us on all major social media channels, including Discord. Much love from 00. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.